Hello and welcome. Today, I am going to be offering a bonus discussion on the topic of the value of the postgrad slash gap year for high school student athletes, bringing awareness to families as far as the value that may offer their students. And today, I am really glad that we were able to track down, going on 16 years, someone that I trusted with my son 16 years ago, and to this day still have a tremendous relationship. And really, this is someone that I send a lot of people to because I value his life mentor skills for young athletes. And Eric Cressey, who is the owner, creator of all things Cressey Performance, both in Hudson, Massachusetts, with Pistol Pete, as well as in Jupiter, Florida, and currently the director of player performance and health for the Evil Empire, affectionately known as the New York Yankees. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to catch up.
And this is something that I can remember as far back as 2008, 2009, you and I talking about the value of physical maturation and the postgraduate or gap year in your experiences over the last decade and a half. What has that meant to athletes that you've worked with as far as being fully prepared for the college athletic experience?
I think for the right person, it's huge, and I think for a lot of different reasons. Certainly there are some that maybe need a little bit more emotional maturity, some that need more academic preparation. We see these kids that get recruited by high academic institutions, and then they actually go and they look at the grades, and maybe they're not there, and doing a year at a high academic postgrad year can be a blessing for them, just kind of bumping the numbers up to make it a little bit better of a fit and to prepare them. And then certainly like physically, it goes without saying that we see a lot of late bloomers. We see kids that maybe start school, early, some of those August birthdays, September birthdays that maybe should have waited a year. In hindsight's 2020, where they can actually, spend some time kind of playing a little bit of catch up. So I think that's really important. And then, the other thing that's probably a bigger conversation now than it was, pre-COVID is just the logjam on a lot of these rosters. Is sometimes you have a perfect fit academically, geographically, socially. It's the school you want to go to, and they just don't have space for you. So I think that's a scenario where sometimes we see a kid who just takes a gap year. Maybe they do an internship. Maybe they take some online classes. They do something different, not necessarily a formalized academic experience, just so they can kind of I guess punt on the year for just a little bit. So we've seen a lot of needs for this, and a lot of kids that have really benefited from it.
You're the product. You have a parent that's in the education space, and I know you being from New England, as am I. I just would love for you to share your thoughts or opinions. The postgraduate experience has been around for centuries,
Yeah.
largely used over the last 3 or 4 decades for hockey, basketball, football, and now really becoming a formidable option for youth baseball. Can you just talk about, growing up in New England, a lot of the higher level academic institutions have been doing or offering postgraduate years for decades. Just share a little bit about that being from New England.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Sam Fold is now the general manager of the Philadelphia Phillies, and Sam is a proud, Phillips Exeter graduate who trained with us throughout his pro career. So, he played at Stanford. So there's obviously, a history of those types of schools. And Sam wasn't a post grad guy, but them kicking out academic talent to go really all over the place. So I think it's hard to really compete with that. And no matter what people say, high school is not college. No matter how much, they try to simulate it, even at private schools. Like I think you need to get off. You need to be away from home a little bit. You need to experience that. For some people, it's a change socially, geographically. That's really, really important for them. So we have seen a lot of kids that have thrived with that, and certainly you need something more academically rigorous than high school. I think most people get a couple years into college and they reflect on how easy high school was comparatively, even though high school felt immeasurably hard when they were seniors and, working through AP exams and things like that. So college is just a different world. And I think it is, kind of an important transition. But to speak to maybe the changes that have led to this, one of the things is, so we founded Cressey Sports Performance in 2007. I didn't see a Tommy John surgery in the first 2.5, 3 years we were open, in spite of the fact that, we were 95% baseball players. I can tell you at any given time at Cressey Sports Performance, we have 4 or 5 guys training in their braces post-operatively, meaning that, injury rates in baseball have gone sky high. We're very well positioned as like a rehab facility in addition to being a training facility. So you can kind of do everything in one spot, but just the game has changed so dramatically. And, I talked about all those different reasons, whether you need time, to mature, emotionally or academically or physically. Like sometimes if you blow out your elbow and you need a surgery, it's 14 months until you're back. So you kind of need to buy time for a year. So I think that's why this conversation in part is becoming so much more prevalent, is we're seeing more significant injuries, not just frequency of injuries, but the duration of those rehabilitation timelines that are really driving a lot of this need for guys to find a year to work on what they need to work on.
You know, I spend a lot of time specifically talking about the academic component to the postgraduate or gap year, but in reality, there have been many over the last 2 to 3 decades where an Ivy League, a NESCAT school, they have always, called it a gap year. President Obama's daughter took a gap year.
Mm-hmm.
They used to say travel abroad
Yeah.
and go to the hostels and then find yourself and come back a little bit mature. But when we start to kind of engage with parents and talk about that upside from a both academic and athletic maturity perspective, you're someone that interacts with high school athletes that ultimately become the college athlete, and those select few that go on to professional baseball. A year out of your life is not going to make
Yep.
or break your career in any aspect, whether it be academic or athletic. Can you talk a little bit about that as you've evolved over the last 16, 17 years, watching that maturation process? Somebody like Tyler and what they became after the age of 17 or 18, leading into and up to college.
Yeah, I mean, I think buying the extra year of education/life experience is, I think it's been normalized far before we had this discussion. My wife's an optometrist. She did
Right.
4 years of undergrad. She did 4 years of optometry, and she opted to do a residency in specialty contact lenses. So she took an extra year to get educated before she really went to the true workforce. That's a very normal thing. The other thing people don't talk about is in the Ivy League, you really only get 8 semesters academically to get the job done. So if you have an injury while you're playing college baseball, it's very common for guys just to like take a year off while they rehab. And we would see this actually a lot in guys that we worked with in our Massachusetts. Like kids would, be at Harvard, they'd have an elbow surgery, they'd take a year off, they do like an internship in private equity or something to that effect, and they'd come back with a stronger resume because of it. So same thing with minor league baseball. If you get injured, it's less of a big deal than if you're in a major leaguer, because you can always make that year up. And in many cases, it's kind of a step back to take 2 steps forward, because you develop a little bit of life skills. And this is very common in the working world, where a lot of times people want to go and work for a couple of years before they go and get their MBA. In many cases, their employer pays for it. And some of these programs look for people that have some real world experience. So I do think that's a really good way to build some value in your resume. What you don't want to be is that kid that just takes a year off and all you do is play baseball and train. And the longer you've been out of school, the harder it is to get back into school. And I talked to this with our high school draft picks who get taken, hey, just enroll in some kind of college courses, finance, writing, whatever it is, just so you don't forget how to learn. Listen to podcasts, have a book reading list, all that stuff. But I think when we see people who go out of their way to actually map out a little bit of a curriculum for the year, or, to do an internship or something like that. And certainly when you talk about some of these schools, the Andovers, the Exeters, they have something that's much more formalized for people. Enrolling in college courses, very formalized education, which I think is really important.
You offer, I think, tremendous value and perspective, because with your new role with the Yankees, you have a professional side. You deal a lot with the amateur student athletes and families. But I would love for you to discuss or share. Parents seem to think that it's just a linear move. They're just kind of moving forward. But in professional sports, there's hiccups along the way. But now we're seeing that enter the college
Yeah.
process. The athletes are older. Their athletes are more mature. High school athletes, in light of the new settlement that's coming, there's going to be less room at the inn.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents struggle with trying to find their way swimming upstream, for lack of a better analogy. And can you kind of talk about, this is really where families now, and the post grad year, gap year, can use this time to figure out how to fight through that and learn how to compete. The
Yeah.
competitive side of travel baseball may not be as challenging or stringent as it is about to
Yeah.
become at the college and professional level.
That's a good point. I do think we are dealing with a little bit of a generation of young athletes that haven't learned how to work through struggle. We both know the successes in the struggle. Like trying to figure out how to work through a lot of that is really, really important. I think we, not to put it on parents, because I think it's a multifactorial thing with the way coaches are approaching travel ball and stuff like that. But I do think we get a lot of helicopter / snowplow parents that want to push things out of the way for their kids, when in reality we need to let them fall flat on their face. And sometimes that happens in a gap year in a good way. I don't mean that they wind up in prison or anything like that. It's more just that, hey, you got to go do your laundry for the first time. You got to grocery shop for yourself. Like these are really good things. So I do think that's a really important kind of side benefit to this, beyond just buying time and physical maturity that we get with with training and taking more ground balls and more time in the cage and throwing more bullpens. Like there is an opportunity to mature in different ways. I can't overstate enough though that if you're going to do something like this, you got to find a way not to make it an either or. You have to make it an and. You have to find different ways to enrich the experience. Get yourself around the right people while you're doing it. Find a way to add to the educational experience, whether it's volunteer work, internships, something like that. That's such a differentiator versus someone who just has like a 1 year gap in their resume where it just it leads to questions of why is this taking place.
When you and I first started talking, I referred to you as a life mentor. I say that to parents all the time. I certainly am not doing that just to blow smoke. I can say
Thank you.
definitively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that both you and Mrs. C, Anna Cressey, really play a vital, still to this day, pivotal role in the development of my youngest son, Tyler. But really, what I would love for you to discuss, because this is a great point that is missed by the vast majority of parents. When you engage at a facility similar to Cressey Performance, again, whether it's Hudson, Mass, or Jupiter, Florida, can you talk a little bit about the rubbing of the value of the life mentors and the athletic mentors, rubbing up against Tristan McKenzie and Walker Bueller and all of these athletes that have been through the process, are able to give back and shed light on their processes and the struggles, at the collegiate as well as professional level. Can you talk a little bit about that, more so than just the strength training? You're getting life skills from these athletes that are working in and around you.
Yeah, for sure. I think any parent would agree that more is caught than taught, right? Best example I can give you, we were leaving my breakfast spot, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when our kids were probably 3 or 4. And I was carrying a hot coffee, and one of our daughters jumped up onto my arm and tried to hold on to me. And I spilled hot coffee on my hand, and I muttered, "Damn it," underneath my breath. And the whole ride home, I had a 4-year-old in the back. Damn it, damn it, damn it. She was singing the song in the back. So it's just one of those things where you catch yourself and you realize it. But I think one of the things that we did very unintentionally, I mean, and Tyler was honestly part of this back in the days. You remember the days of, the guys used to call it their Pete time. They'd finish training, and then you'd have, Ty and Joe Napolitano and Max Tishman, some of those guys.
Tim
Yeah,
Collins, and
exactly.
yeah.
They were rubbing elbows with pro guys, and those pro guys at the time were minor leaguers, and they hadn't necessarily found their way. You had Steve Cishek popping in after a 2-hour ride from the Cape, 4 days a week, so they would interact with these guys. Oliver Drake was a mainstay back then, and I didn't realize it was happening in real time. But just those guys getting around pro guys who had seen more of the game, more of the world, was really big. And now I see it at our Florida facility on a much bigger level, where first year big leaguer is coming in and interacting with Cy Young Award winners, MVPs, and they're throwing a bullpen, and they got a guy with 10 years of service time standing in and giving them feedback on what their slider's doing, and why they might be tipping a certain pitch and all that stuff. It just happens very organically. We never forced it. We never market it. It kind of is just one of those things that happens because I think when you put good people who really care about their attention to detail, and they take a lot of pride in their work ethic, you put them in the same place. What you're trying to create is like that third place, right? There's home, there's work or school, and then in our case, it's CSP. So we want them all to, kind of let their freak flag fly a little bit, let their guard down a little bit, and before you know it, there's a lot of really good sharing that takes place. So, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? If your kid winds up in the wrong environment, he's going to get influenced by the wrong people. So, you got to pick your roommates wisely and stuff like that. But in the gym, what I can tell you is the bad apples weed themselves out really, really quickly. They don't necessarily, kind of carry the flag like they should with respect to the work ethic that we expect of them, and physically what we challenge them with. So I have found that it's become a good nurturing ground for not just better baseball players, but also, as you implied, hopefully better humans.
You just touched on a topic, and I'm going to squeeze this question in, and I didn't have it in my original line of questions, but you just alluded to Mr. Cechek 2-hour drive. And I always try to tell parents, they'll always say to me, well, I live an hour away, I live an hour and a half away, and I don't know. I know that I drove Tyler from Auburn to Hudson, back to Auburn. It's not easy, but I would love for you to talk about, this is not a pathway that is just filled with simple little processes.
Yeah.
For some, it's a 2-hour drive up and back. And for others, it is a real challenge to find their way to the discipline of 4 to 5 times a week to a Cressey Performance. Can you talk about, that's a separator, but parents it falls on deaf ears. Many athletes that you've worked with have had those types of obstacles.
Yeah. I think the one thing the longer I've been in baseball, more the higher levels that I get to, and you're around big leaguers, these guys are all the best players in the history of their town. And that's not just U.S. towns. That's Venezuelan towns. That's Dominican towns. That's Puerto Rican towns. That's Mexican towns. And these guys have struggled too. This game is really, really hard. And you can get humbled very, very quickly. So I think sometimes guys, their actions of today don't really align with their goals for tomorrow. And the kids that differentiate themselves, obviously Tyler was one of them. Sahil Bloom was one of them. You see these guys. Barrett O'Neill, I talk about often, going to hockey practice at 5:30 in the morning and coming and training in the afternoon to do his throwing program. Like, they're just different breeds. And I think we see a lot of kids now that they like to post on Instagram about how hard they're working. And, really when the rubber meets the road, they aren't nearly as prepared as they thought. So part of that commitment sometimes might be doing what isn't convenient. It might be making sacrifices and, committing every Saturday morning to making a drive to do something like that. I do think it's probably easier now than it was, back when we were, first getting to know each other in 08, 09, when Ty was a sophomore in high school, because, there are more facilities that, have invested in pitching technology and, have, a more built out maybe awareness of baseball strength and conditioning. There's certainly a lot of copycat facilities where there's some holes in the knowledge base, but it is more available, where if you are willing to commit and and travel a little bit, invest in financial resources, things like that you can get considerably better. And I also think there are times when you have actually pretty good high school strength and conditioning coaches that are more available for athletes as well, and that's not always a bad idea to look at either, where you have people who will spend some time with you on your own home turf and make it more convenient so you can get in more quality work. But I do think on the whole, young high school kids, and it's not any fault of their own, they just don't have context, but they have no idea how much hard work it takes to really get to that level. They can do it for a week, but they can't do it for 3 years. And when we see the best of the best, like, they're either very genetically blessed or they're really, really hard workers. And then the elite ones are generally, kind of a combination of the two.
Okay, this is my final question, and and I want parents to understand. Eric has been kind enough to share his time. I really don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Tommy Johns and arm injuries. That's really not our topic for today. There are plenty of podcasts that Eric does on player development, arm care, all of that, and I encourage you, and I will have his links not only on this podcast and this video, but I encourage you to take the time to listen to Eric's podcast, because they are ultra informative for all athletes, not just baseball centric. Yes, he does talk about arm care and arm health and things of that nature, but really in general, talking about the development of the complete and total athlete. And
Thank you.
Eric, I really want to kind of end today's discussion on a topic that you deal with on a variety of different levels that I try to get parents to understand. And really, this is part of our discussion today on postgraduate year. And the word is disappointment. Meaning that a lot of parents, they think, okay, I'm going to go from my high school, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get drafted. But I just would love for you to talk about, your perspective on the challenges, the hurdles, the obstacles, but more importantly, the disappointment. Tyler Beede is going to be a great big leaguer in 2019, 2020, Tommy John surgery. And, now the rocket is varying all over the place. But disappointment is part of the youth athletic
Yeah.
process. It's part of the college and professional athletic process. Can you talk about your perspective as how to deal with that, both physically, but most importantly, emotionally?
Yeah, and I'll use Ty as a great example because I know we've talked about this story before. Ty got cut from Team USA, in the summer between junior and senior year, and I know that was something that was super important to him. It's a 20-man roster, and he was a completely different person when he came back from that. It was probably the first time that he had been told no in his baseball career, and he really used it as an amazing motivator and completely changed his body. I mean, he put on 25 pounds that summer, or excuse me, that off season. Invested in himself heavily. Took care of his nutrition, his sleep, all that stuff. On top of being at a very academically challenging place, he checked a lot of boxes. So changed a lot. But then even on maybe a more micro level, we both remember the outing at Middlesex. I know because I was going to watch it. The Middlesex has no outfield fence. So as I'm walking in from the parking lot in the, I think it's like the first inning, Ty's legging out a triple that he hit over, the center fielder's head. Ball's rolling right towards me. And I mean, gassed himself out. And he was 88-91 that game after being, 93 to 95, the whole season. The whole scouting world is freaking out. The world was ending. I remember that was the day Theo Epstein and some other guys from the Red Sox came to see him. So the hometown team had watched, and, there was all this concern about what was going on. He was 94 to 96 the next weekend, literally 5 to 7 days later. And I use that example very, very often. It's like we put so much pressure on high school kids to consistently repeat their deliveries, repeat their performance. Like you have Major League Baseball players whose vertical release height varies by a full half of a foot over the course of a season. Their delivery is all over the place. They're constantly trying to double check it. And that's with tons of people watching this for them, tons of tech scrutinizing it, high-speed cameras all over the places. And we put so much pressure on high school kids to be perfect every time out. I'm reading a book called The Gap and the Gain, where they talk a lot about like people who spend a lot of time in the gap, why they're short of what they need to, instead of, the gain, thinking about how far they come, how appreciative they are of the resources they have at their fingertips, how blessed they are. Like, I think we need to be really careful about being too negative on young athletes all the time, because there is a normal variance in the overall experience that I think is a really, really important thing. And remember that Team USA team I just talked about, I was with it 5 years later. I was the strength coach for the 1800 national team. And I'll never forget being in that room when they cut some kids who were first rounders the following year, similar to Ty. And I'll never forget Glenn Cicchini, who was our national team manager. He's like, we cut Mike Trout from this team years ago. Like, so it's scouts are wrong a lot more than they right, So I think we always need to have that in the back of our mind, is like, you can either prove them wrong or you can prove them right, in the way that you respond to not getting selected or whatever it may be. And I think it's so important. The kid who worries me, honestly, more than anyone else is the one who's never struggled, because the concern is when you struggle for the first time, when you're in AA or even the big leagues, you have no strategies for overcoming. I think that's also one of the reasons why we do see in general college players doing better in pro ball. Like you don't go to the SEC or ACC without getting your teeth kicked in, just a little bit. You have to struggle on those big stages, and I hate to say it, but fail where there aren't consequences. I think that's a really big deal.
Well, I want to say thank you, and I want to let all parents know we're going to have everything pertaining to Eric's Cressey Performance in Hudson, Mass. The contacts, the links. You can find Eric and Cressey Performance in the Baseball Blue Book. I encourage you to download that app. I think the Baseball Blue Book, it's free, but B, it's all baseball all the time. If it has to do with baseball, it's going to be in the book. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time. I don't want to say go team from New York, but best of luck in coming up
Thank you.
over the next week. And I appreciate your time. And folks, please leave a comment and a like if this is the type of content. This is a bonus piece for our postgraduate work, but we're going to do more of this over the coming months on all topics related to sleep, nutrition, strength training, things of that nature. And obviously, Eric will be a resource during that time. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Walter. Always good to see you.